it's 12:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. I don't want to abuse your time since you are taking time out of your day to attend this meeting. So today, well, my name's Eileen Smith to start with. I am an associate broker in the Decatur office, and I am also the broker who writes all the 10-day letters and commission demand letters for the Heart of Atlanta group. So Tom has asked me to come on today and to speak to, does your buyer or seller, your client, owe you commission because they did something wrong during the transaction? So before I start out with the materials that I have prepared, does anybody have any specific situations that they've run into that they have questions about? And maybe I'll start my topic there with maybe buyers versus sellers. I was going to start with sellers. So we don't have anything. Okay. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. And what I have done is I've gone through the buyer brokerage and the seller brokerage agreement, the listing agreement, and I have highlighted some things that are in those documents to help you. If you guys have never read the buyer brokerage or the seller brokerage agreement, you need to do so. There's a lot of things in there that might surprise you. So if you look at the seller brokerage engagement agreement on page 4, it talks about commissions and the seller's obligation to pay commission. So in a seller brokerage transaction, the seller is entering into a contract, obviously, to sell or lease their property, and they are agreeing to pay a certain amount of commission as part of that. And it's talks about sharing with the cooperating broker. I don't know if you realized, but if the cooperating broker is not in FMLS, or Georgia MLS, we are not required to share our commission with them. Now we should, but we are not required to. And of course, there is separate commission on a lease transaction. The protected period, let's talk about the protected period. A lot of folks put in their brokerage agreements with their clients protected periods that are 365 days. That is not the way I teach it. The protected period is usually some much shorter period of time. 30 to 90 days is the most I suggest. And that has to do with the seller potentially owing you commission after this document expires. Now, there's certain parameters around them paying you that commission once this document expires. And I don't know that you're going to stalk your buyers and sellers for 365 days. If you want to do that, you can do that. But the protected period, if there is a, if the document just expires, is in full force and effect. The protected period is in full force and effect with a unilateral termination, but it dies with a mutual termination. So if you mutually terminate a seller brokerage or a buyer brokerage agreement with your client, then the protected period is no longer applicable to your commission. So we've, the protected period covers you in seller brokerage, and I don't know why this one line is whited out here and doesn't show up. It says in the second paragraph down here, notwithstanding the above, if this agreement expires, an exception to, oh, I'm sorry, talk about the above commission obligation. Okay, in the event, let's start with in the event, I apologize, right here in this section. In the event that during the protected period, seller enters into a contract to sell or lease purchase, or lease with option to purchase, all or any portion of the property which during the term of this commission, this agreement was submitted to. So anyway, this is the listing. Identified or shown to a buyer, either in person or virtually, and was provided specific information about that inquiry on the property, either directly or through a broker working with the buyer, then the seller shall pay broker at closing commission. So what does that mean? That means that if the property was shown to a buyer while it was listed with you, and you have proof that that specific buyer went into the property, or you showed it to a specific buyer, and it's really, really, really difficult to prove a specific buyer has gone into your listing with an agent, because we only know who the agents are. But if you are able to prove that a buyer went into your listing with an agent, and after your document expired or after your agreement expired, and that seller sold the property to that other agent's client, they owe you commission. Okay. But again, you've got to be able to prove that that other agent showed the property while it was listed with you to that client. Now, how many of you keep track of who agents who actually go into your property, and how do you do that? Does anybody do that?
Through showing time?
You can do that in showing time. That is one of the ways to do it. You know, you get the requests from them. Does anybody know how to set up notifications in Supra? Did you know you can set up notifications in Supra? Because the Supra app will allow you, if you go into Supra eKey to their website, you can program that lockbox to be associated with a listing, and you can have it send you email notifications when that agent enters the property and accesses your lockbox. Not everybody sets up their appointments in showing time, particularly when you have a vacant listing, correct? How are you going to know an agent went into your property? And you can always contact them after the fact to find out who their client is, I'm sure. But if they didn't set something up in showing time, you've got no way to know that they've been in your property. Yes, Barbara?
One of the things I do, Eileen, how are you today? One of the things I do is put in my listing that they have to contact me so that I can have a list of who's going in there. That they have to contact me before going into the property.
Yeah, but they don't always do that. They honestly don't always do that. I had a listing that it had been under contract and listed as under contract for 3 weeks. And one morning, all of a sudden, I get a notification in my email from Supra that an agent just went to the property. Well, the property was occupied. It was occupied by 4 adults and 4 very large dogs. And the minute this agent didn't even knock, she just saw the sign, decided on her own, even though there was a car in the driveway, that the property was vacant. She didn't know the status. She opened the lockbox, opened the door, and 4 very large dogs came charging at her. You know, I called the seller, and by that time the skirmish had ended. But, you know, unless you've got something set up in Supra, you don't know who's going into your property and when. Does that make sense? You can ask people to contact you all day long, and you know, I'm sure, Barbara, even from past experience, you've had your license long enough. Agents are just going to go into your listing just because they see it and they think, oh, well, you know, let me see what this house looks like.
You're right. And I do like that super setup though. But you're right. I put that in the listing, but you're right. I do set it up in Supra so I can have a record of who's going in and out.
Right. And then you find out later, 60 days later, that your seller's no longer in the property and he sold it to someone. And you can call some of the agents that went in there and say, hey, you know, who is that client? Do you remember which client you showed this property to find out if it's one of those people. Now, it may or may not be. You know, our sellers do all kinds of things. It's really hard with a seller to prove that someone else, or that they showed someone your property while it was listed with you, and then later the seller decided to go ahead and sell it to them off market and close. It's easier on the buyer side, but just understand that, you know, that Supra lockbox thing, could help you in proving that an agent went in there and who that buyer was at some point in the future. If we go to page 8 of the seller brokerage agreement, it talks about seller default. And this is where it talks about how the seller would owe us commission. In the event of default, the seller terminating this agreement prior to the end of it without prior written agreement of the broker. You know, sellers sometimes when they have a fight with their agent, you know, I've seen them show up at the front desk with a doorknob with a lockbox attached to it and a sign and say, you know, I fired your agent and they wouldn't take their equipment off of my property. And so here it is. You know, and they should contact the broker if they're having problems with an agent. You're not terminating a listing, but if a seller wants to terminate a listing with you, you need to let them. You don't have to do a mutual. You can let them do a unilateral. Again, that keeps your protected period in force. But this unilateral termination or early termination is what requires them to still pay you commission. If they default, number 2, if they default under the contract to sell the property, resulting in such contract not closing. Now, seller default is an ugly situation, but I have had seller default happen. You know, the buyer gets their earnest money back and they have a choice. They can sue the seller if they want to, but if you've got a case for default, you've got a case for me to write a commission demand letter to that seller. Now, taking that seller to court depends on how much the commission is, if the brokerage would be willing to represent you in that. But we can certainly write a commission demand letter and let them know that they have violated the seller brokerage agreement. Number 3, agrees with the buyer of the property to terminate a contract to sell without consent of the broker. And again, this is, you know, they agree on the side out, you know, they meet each other. Oh, okay, we're both going to terminate, and they decide to mutually terminate the contract. You still have a case against your seller for default. Or if the seller refuses to accept a lawful, bona fide written offer to purchase the property, meeting the following terms and conditions, and it has to meet all of them. Understand, if you have a seller and you present them an offer for the full list price with no contingencies, and I'm talking no due diligence, no finance, no any kind of contingency, and the date of the closing is not less than 30 days or more than 45 days from the offer date. So this would probably be a cash offer, or in a multiple offer situation, an offer that was at least the full list price with no finance contingency. You have a case if your seller refuses to accept that offer to get paid commission. All right, and that would be, again, a commission demand letter that would be written to your seller. So again, if you present them with a full price offer and they're just like, no, I just want to wait for something more. And I've had a seller do that once. Some of you have been around a while, probably have had that too. They can't do that. They have agreed in the brokerage agreement to sell the house for a certain price. And if we bring them an offer with that price and no contingencies, and they refuse to accept it, they owe commission. Talks about broker remedies and paying the broker commission, and seller in those cases, and seller default. In seller default, they can also owe you marketing and other expenses. All right. So whatever out-of-pocket expenses, including and without limitation, printing, copying, mileage, your lockbox, your sign, whatever you had to do, if you had to pay for staging, if you paid for an appraisal, whatever you may or may not have come out of pocket for, open houses, things of that nature. They can owe you that too. You have to have the receipts, but they can owe you that in addition to the commission that's owed. Any questions about any of that on the seller side? We've got an enthusiastic crowd today, I can tell. We're going to go to the buyer side now. So we're going to go to page 2 of the buyer brokerage agreement. And page 2, section 4, talks about commission, because that's on page 1. Page 1, we designate if our buyer is going to owe us commission if the seller isn't paying, or if the seller doesn't pay a full 3%, depending on how you filled out page 1 of that buyer brokerage agreement. So again, section 4 talks about the buyer's commission obligation in the purchase of real property. And it says the obligation of the buyer to pay commission shall be offset by any commission paid to broker by the seller's broker. So you get 2 or 2.5% from the seller side. The buyer has the obligation to pay the remainder. Now, it's not a requirement. You can waive that obligation because we have so many listings these days that are doing that. And if your buyer is FHA or VA, they can't. The lending programs will not allow them to make up your commission. But if your buyer is cash or conventional, as long as their mortgage lender agrees on the conventional loan, they can make up the difference in your commission, and that goes on the instructions to closing attorney. So that's a conversation that you need to have with your client prior to showing them a property that is not paying a full 3% commission. It's not fair to blindside them with this after you've shown it to them. I would tell them before you show it to them. And of course, commission on FSBOs. FSBOs sometimes cover agents, sometimes don't cover agents. And you need to have that conversation with your buyer. If it's a for sale by owner and they want to see it, you may have to tell them that the seller is not going to cover my commission. If you want me to show you this property, you're going to have to pay my commission. They may change their mind on doing that. Most of my clients have in the past. I've not had a problem explaining that to them. If we go to page 3, where section 4 continues on, excuse me, it talks about the protected period. The protected period in buyer brokerage is slightly different than seller brokerage, but has the same premise. The protected period is the amount of time after this agreement expires that if your buyer decides to go back and purchase the property, you are owed commission on the transaction. And you are owed that commission by the buyer if the seller's not going to pay it. You have to have shown them that property. You have to have proof you showed them that property. You have to have proof that you presented that property to them in some way, shape, or form while they were your client. So when we have these clients, we set up gateways in the MLS for them. We email them listings. Retain those emails. You know, keep that screenshots of those gateways. These are things that you have to do to prove that you presented that property to them and they found that property as a result of working with you during the period of this agreement. Now, Zillow and Realtor.com and all of those real estate websites in some ways have made our job easier, but in a lot of ways it's made our job harder because they can say, oh, no, you didn't send that one to me. I saw it on Zillow. But again, if you have an email proof that you emailed them that listing, that is your ticket to being able to talk to them about their commission obligation in purchasing that property after your buyer brokerage agreement has expired. Okay. We're going to look real quickly at the mutual termination of brokerage engagement agreement. We almost never use this, I think. It comes up once in a while, but most of the time it's a unilateral termination by one party or the other in a real estate transaction, but not a termination of a brokerage engagement. So in section 2 of the mutual termination, it says if the brokerage engagement agreement is a listing agreement, not a buyer, but a listing agreement, the cost to remove the early listing from the multiple listing service shall be paid by the client. That is in the seller brokerage engagement agreement. They owe you the $50, $25 a piece for FMLS and Georgia MLS for the listing removal. But with the mutual, you can designate here in section 3 Simultaneously with the execution of this agreement, client shall pay broker X number of dollars to reimburse them for fees, costs, and expenses incurred while the listing was in force or while you were preparing the listing for market. Client shall pay broker X number of dollars in full and final settlement of all claims, causes of action, suits, and damages. This is where potentially they would pay some commission due to some default, even as part of the mutual agreement. And then the paragraph below that says, effective upon entering into this agreement, client and broker do hereby release one another from all claims, causes of action, suits, and damages. So if you want your seller to pay anything or buyer to pay anything in a mutual agreement, you better put it in paragraph 3 here. Otherwise, you are releasing one another from any obligations moving forward. So just be aware of that when using the mutual termination agreement. Any questions? Okay, we're going to go to the unilateral. This is the unilateral termination of a brokerage engagement agreement, not the unilateral for a purchase and sale, but the unilateral of a brokerage engagement. Okay. The top portion is termination by client. The bottom portion is termination by broker. So you can fire your client or they can fire you. If your client fires you, it says in here, in terminating this agreement, broker is directed by client not to perform real estate brokerage services on their behalf after the termination date. Nothing herein shall be construed as an agreement between them to terminate, mutually terminate, or to limit, waive, or terminate broker's rights to commission or the reimbursement of fees and costs. So again, this unilateral still says you could be due some commission. You can still come to them for commission. They might be terminating early because they found the house that they want that you showed them, and you know the old story. They talk to the seller on the side and the seller says, I'll fire my agent, you fire yours, I'll sell you the house for X number of dollars less than what it's listed for. So this unilateral firing by the client does not release them from paying you money that might be owed or anything that might fall into the protected period of your agreement, whether it's buyer brokerage or seller brokerage. Now, termination by broker is a little bit different story. If you fire your client, seller or buyer, in terminating the agreement, broker will not perform real estate services. But it still does not eliminate the client's obligation to pay broker for commission and fees due to them if the reason for the termination is breach of the agreement by client. What's breach? That's hard to define. You know, if they terminated and you find out later, yes, they sold it to somebody that a seller terminates, you find out later they sold the property to a buyer that was presented to them while it was listed with you, that's breach. Okay. Again, but you've got to prove that breach. It's easier to prove with buyers in the fact that you know what properties you've shown your buyer, but keeping a log of the properties you show your buyer is extremely important. You've got proof on your super key of every lockbox you have entered. Your super key keeps track of every lockbox you went into. But logging appointments on your calendar, keeping those sheets, you know, the agent full sheets, if you take those to your listings to show your buyer, keeping track of all of that information is all proof that you showed the property and you are owed commission because the buyer went around you to purchase the property. Okay. So you see where that's a little bit easier when you're representing a buyer versus representing a seller. So any questions about the unilateral? Okay. I have one more thing to bore you with. And those of you who are brokers may be aware of the Broker Red Book. The Broker Red Book, of course, is written by Seth. He writes all the GAR forms. He writes the red book. And in the red book, it's two huge, 2-inch paperback books that are letter size, bigger than letter size actually. Anyway, in those documents, he explains in excruciating detail what those documents mean and what constitutes default in those documents in verbiage outside of what's in the actual agreement. And he puts in examples. So here in the example, when he's talking about buyer brokerage, example, Realtor A enters into an exclusive buyer brokerage engagement agreement using a GAR form, and the buyer agrees that in the event the seller or seller's broker does not pay their commission in accordance with the brokerage agreement, the buyer will pay her broker the difference to ensure that agent receives a 3.5% commission on the purchase price of the property. The buyer purchased a property she viewed with the broker's agent. The broker engagement agreement and the MLS listing indicate the commission to be paid to the cooperating real estate broker will be 2.5%. We're running into that a lot. Can the buyer's broker require the buyer to pay her additional commission? Yes, the answer is yes, because they indicated in that brokerage agreement that they would pay the difference. They can be obligated to do so, and that happens on the instructions to closing attorney. But again, I strongly recommend that before you show a listing that the co-op commission is less than what your buyer agreed to on the buyer brokerage, that you have a conversation with them. Again, if they're VA or FHA, it's a moot point. But if they're paying cash or getting a conventional lending that has some greater percentage of down payment, I would say, other than 3 to 5%, the lender will probably approve them making up the difference in your commission. So again, letting them know, the more you let them know up front, the more you are protected in getting the difference in your commission. Yes, Nicole.
So Eileen, I have had clients who agreed upfront to pay that difference if the seller wasn't paying 3% to the buyer side. And, you know, I didn't change anything in the buyer brokerage agreement. I kept it at, you know, the normal 3%, but we had the verbal agreement. And then when we went to closing, of course, I put it on the instructions to closing attorney. Everything was fine. But I'm just saying, moving forward, how do you protect yourself other than just a verbal agreement? Where do you put that in the buyer brokerage agreement?
You put it on page 1. Page 1 of the buyer brokerage agreement in section 4 states that buyer will pay broker X commission in the transaction in the event that there is no co-op commission or a co-op commission less than this amount.
Okay.
It's on page 1 of the buyer.
On the right-hand side. Okay.
Well, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah. Right.
You have a couple of options in section 4. You can put a percentage. You can choose to put market rate, which means you'll accept whatever the seller's co-op commission is, even if it's 2.5%, which is what you probably should do with your VA and FHA buyers, or you can put a dollar amount. Amy.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, it's good to know all of the details of this, but on a practical level, this all feels very theoretical. And if I could just share a situation I had, I buyers out, I wrote offers for them. Then they got kind of quiet. Then I received an email from them saying they were pausing their search. And because it's a small world and they used my lender, I learned that 4 days after their email telling me for family reasons that they were pausing their search, that they were under contract with another agent. So, and we had a buyer's agreement. And I mean, I guess what I'm asking or saying is like, yes, there are things that I could have done or Tom could have done, but in the big picture, it's not worth my time and they're not worth my time. So, do you know what I mean? Like, does anyone actually on these things?
Yeah, sometimes it's just better to let it go. But in that situation, yeah, and getting our buyers to use our loan officers, we find that information out a lot quicker. Now, you know, if this was a situation where you had shown them the property that they eventually purchased,
Right.
we're not going to take them to court. All I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you for proof that they never terminated your buyer brokerage, that all they sent you was an email or a text message that says we're going to pause our search. I'm going to ask you for proof you showed them the property and when you showed it, and I'm going to write them a letter, and I'm going to tell them that because they chose, and it was probably something to do with a family member or something who said, oh no, you got to use this agent.
Exactly.
That they chose to go ahead and purchase that property using another agent. They have not been released from their obligation to pay our brokerage the co-op commission of whatever amount that it was. And in doing so, we might take them to court. So, but they should be writing us a check. They may not. Again, do you want that getting out into the marketplace? You know, when they get that letter, are they going to run around and say, well, Amy Tozer, you know, I didn't really fire her, but she sent me this threatening letter and said I owed her 3% commission. It's up to you. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah, I don't want to see that on a review somewhere online.
Yeah, most of the time it's not worth it. I've had several situations over the years I could have done that, and I didn't. You know, it's what you choose to do. Is that how you want to be known in your business? I mean, again, I'm just telling you that these are the situations that our clients create that could require that they owe us a commission. Now, if it was a $1 million or $1.5 million home and they owed you $30,000 or $45,000, oh, hell yeah. Ask me to write a letter. Will our office take them to court? Maybe.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, years ago when I was doing short sales, I actually, when I listed a short sale property, I would pull all the liens on the property. My attorney would do that for me. So we knew, and there was actually, I saw several properties along the way that had real estate liens on them for commission. You know, you don't necessarily have to take them to court to get a court order that says they owe you commission. You can go to the courthouse and you can file a lien on their house for what they owe you because you had a contract and we wrote a letter, and you could lien their house if you wanted to. I mean, that's another option. But again, do you want that to be known with today's social media and everything, how everything gets out there? That's up to you. The next page of the Red Book goes on to talk about the entitlement to commission after expiration or termination of the buyer brokerage agreement. Strictly buyer brokerage still now. Again, a property identified or shown to the buyer by the broker, or about which the broker provided the information to the buyer during the term of the agreement. And again, you've got to be very, very, very specific in what you have. So there's some examples here of proof that you showed a buyer a house. Example one is faxes of MLS sheets. Now we don't fax anymore, but I would say emails of MLS sheets. If you have copies of emails and you retain the emails that you sent to your buyer during the term of the agreement, and they went out and bought one of these properties, whether you showed it or not, it's proof that you were procuring cause. We've heard that word before, procuring cause. You were the reason they found out about the property. You know, that is a way to dispute, oh, I saw it on Zillow or I saw it on realtor.com. Okay. The next example is you actually show them the property. Okay. The agreement in this case, you had a protected period of 120 days, and 45 days later, they went up. Let's see, hold on. The agreement provides the broker is protected for 120 days after the termination, 110 days after the agreement terminated, the buyer entered into a contract to purchase the property. Closing was set for 45 days later, but they entered in the agreement during the term of your protected period. So yes, They only needed to enter into that agreement and they could owe you commission. All right, but you still have to prove that you sent them that information or you showed them that property. Example number 3, sorry. You have a brokerage engagement agreement for 30 days with that protects your commission for 90 days. You have a protected period for 90 days. You show the buyer numerous homes. The buyer does not submit an offer on any of them. After the brokerage agreement expires, the buyer immediately enters into another buyer brokerage engagement agreement with broker number 2 within the 90-day protected period under brokerage agreement with broker number 1. Broker number 2 shows the buyer one of the same houses that broker number 1 had shown earlier. Is broker number 1 entitled to commission? Yes, because you were the initial procuring cause of the property. You know, we get buyers that want 30-day brokerage agreements, and those 30-day brokerage agreements are the most susceptible to our clients going out there and doing something and buying or selling property that we were procuring cause for, and they feel that since that agreement had expired, that they can do whatever they want. I suggest that you do a better job of explaining the protected period and procuring cause if you can. And if you can't, certainly I can help you understand that. But if you're procuring cause, you sent them the MLS sheet, you showed them the property, you are the reason they found out about the property. And showing it to them is indisputable proof, but that is procuring cause. And the protected period, again, if it's 365 days, that's fine. Or, you know, you can follow your buyers around for 365 days. But 30 to 90 days is usually sufficient. If they're going to misbehave and they're going to do something like that, they will do it within that shorter time period. So the next page goes on a little bit to talk about procuring cause. It says the growth of buyer brokerage in Georgia in recent years has created many disputes over whether the buyer's broker is the procuring cause of the sale, thus entitled to share in the seller's broker's commission. The term procuring cause is difficult to define, but refers to the general common law principle that a broker who is unable to finalize a sale of a property can still claim a commission if they can show that their efforts triggered a key series of events that without significant interruption resulted in the sale of the property. A variety of factors influence whether a broker is the procuring cause, including whether the broker initiated the series of events leading to the sale, whether there was a break in negotiations, and the reason for any break in negotiations. So this talks about what procuring cause actually is. I use the verbiage procuring cause when someone calls me off a sign and wants to see my listing. You know, people call me, people call you, they call all of us off the sign and they want to know about our listing. And I always ask them, are you working with an agent? They hem and they haw, or they say yes, or they say no. But no matter what their answer, I explain procuring cause very briefly. I just explain to them that, great, I would love to show you this property, but I just want to make sure that you understand that we have a law here in Georgia called procuring cause. If I show you the property, I'm the one that writes the purchase and sale agreement and represents you in the transaction. Do you want me to write that purchase and sale agreement, or do you want someone else to do that? And if they have an agent, or they even are considering using an agent, they're like, oh, well, okay, you know, you need to have that person show you the property, not me. Not that I don't want to show my property. Excuse me. I don't want to get into a dispute with another agent over commission. And the other agent needs to do their job and they need to show the property. there are agents out there, in my experience, that coach their buyers on how to get the listing agent to show them the property. And then they come back and write the offer. And that has spurred the, if I show your agent the property, you get a 1% commission in the private comments of a listing. I honestly don't like that very much at all. Here in our office, our team leader has said he doesn't want us doing it. I know it still happens, but again, just a brief explanation to the buyer when they call you off the sign is all it takes in my experience. Let's go to the Red Book section on seller brokerage. Oops, went down too far, sorry. So in the example in the Red Book on seller brokerage, it says the seller enters into a GAR exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement with a broker in which the seller agrees to pay 7% commission. The seller's broker fills in the blank on the brokerage engagement agreement, indicating he will offer 50% of his commission to the cooperating broker. The seller's broker enters the property into the MLS with a 7% commission and a 50-50 split, or a 3.5% commission to the buyer in the co-op section. Later, the seller and seller's broker orally agree to reduce the commission to 6%, but they do not amend the brokerage engagement agreement, modify the information in the MLS, or tell the buyer's broker of the commission reduction. Is the buyer's broker commission still 3%? And the answer is no, and I have personal experience with this. I had a listing that when I showed it, the co-op commission was 4%. This was years ago. And when we got to the closing table, no matter what the instructions the closing attorney had said, the listing agent told the attorney, because it was their attorney, that the commission was 6% and my portion was only 3%. I showed that closing attorney the listing sheet from the day that I showed the property that said it was 4%, which I put it under contract just a day or two later, and I got my 4% commission. And that's all it took. Didn't take a broker phone call. It didn't take anything else. It took me showing that listing sheet to the closing attorney to get my 4% commission instead of 3%. So again,
Eileen?
yeah.
Hi, this is Susan. Long time no see.
Yes.
On that, wouldn't that also be caught when they send the instructions to closing attorney? And I mean, we should be reviewing it and make sure that it matches up, right? Because I do what you say. I print out the listing sheet and I keep it a file of all the ones I show each client.
Yeah, the agent had changed it. And
Oh,
you can get into Adobe and you can do anything to documents that have already been signed. You'd be surprised. But the agent
okay.
changed the instructions to closing attorney, or just sent the attorney, said, oh, no, we changed the commission. This is wrong. And here it is. Well, it was her attorney. So he took her word for it until I came back and said, whoa, you know, this is not right. And this is what it's supposed to be. Now, whether she had agreed with the seller to change the commission to 6% from 8% or whatever she had it at, this was before the seller brokerage agreement indicated what the actual split was in the different situations. There was a place for what the split would be, but, you know, agents change things with their sellers and they don't always change the MLS.
Okay, thank you.
It can happen, and that's all I'm telling you is it can happen. You know, Adobe Acrobat is a wonderful thing, and it is also a curse because documents can be changed after they've been signed. I don't like it. We can go on. There is a portion in the purchase and sale agreement. If you look at the purchase and sale agreement, page 5 under default, talks about rights of broker and getting commission, actual damages, you know, anything they may owe us for anything we've done to market the property, so on and so forth. So You know, there's all kinds of things in our contracts, if you just read them, that's going to protect your commission. But the one thing that I do want to point out, in the unilateral termination of a purchase and sale agreement, okay, you know, we know in the unilateral that if the buyer terminates during due diligence, the seller has to give them their earnest money back and they get to walk away. If a contingency fails, the seller has to give the buyer their earnest money back and they walk away. Is commission owed in that situation? Not necessarily, but if there's default, okay, and default is always a situation where a broker is going to be owed commission. Default is not showing up at closing. Default is just everybody terminating the contract and agreeing to split commission. Whatever they do in this unilateral situation, there can be a number of issues, but in a unilateral termination, we could still be owed earnest money. In a mutual, not so much, or I'm sorry, earnest money, commission. Sorry, misspoke there. In a mutual, not so much, but let's look here real quick, because again, here I'm just highlighting a buyer and seller release each other and all real estate firms and brokers from damages and suits in signing this, if they agree to disperse the earnest money or agree on the disbursement. In a mutual, hang on, I gotta move things around on my screen here. In a mutual, it says, in consideration of the brokers set forth below agreeing to release the buyer and seller, all other compensation arising out of this agreement and the buyer and seller agree to pay the brokers identified below the following amounts. This is where you can get when a purchase and sale agreement terminates. And again, this is the mutual agreement to terminate a purchase and sale agreement. This is where you can get your commission versus in a unilateral situation. Now, it can't be dispersed from earnest money. Earnest money is earnest money. Earnest money is only used to purchase the property or go to a buyer or a seller in the event of default, not to agents. Amy and Susan both have their hands up. I don't know if Amy's hand is up again or still.
Amy can go first. I'm okay.
Sorry. No, forgot to put it down.
Okay, she forgot
Oh,
to take her
okay.
hand up. Yeah, Susan, go ahead.
So seeing that unilateral just makes me ask the question, this may be actually something a little bit different, but of course that's a unilateral termination. What if, because I had this situation happen a couple of years ago, what if the buyer you're representing decides 3 hours before closing that they don't want to buy the home?
And this is where you, as the real estate agent, choose which document you present them to terminate the agreement. Okay, you can choose to present them with the unilateral and admit default and give the money to the seller. And if the seller's willing to accept the earnest money in default, then it's over. Or you can choose to present them with this mutual, tell them they need to give the earnest money to the seller and that they also owe our broker a commission. So as the agent, you control which document in some respects that your client signed. Now, do you really want to do that?
Right.
Again,
Right.
it goes back to Amy's situation. It's
Yeah,
your
and I
choice.
did not do that. I just thought, oh.
Yeah. If these
Okay.
people really piss you off, I mean, it's tempting to do it. There's no question. There's times when I really wanted to do this, just because these people were beyond annoying or just so hard to work with. You know, we've all had those clients. We wish we'd made them customers. I do very long speeches with the new agents here in the office when I do training about, are they clients or are they customers? Do you really want them to be tied to them as clients just because they might be a little crazy?
They might be,
Um,
but isn't it, yeah, it seems to me like I've heard more messaging around it, it's encouraged to have the BBA. Like when you go enter things into command, they want to see the BBA.
And you either are going to show the buyer brokerage agreement or you're going to show the customer agreement. You can show either one. It is entirely up to you. You can make a customer a client, but you can't make a client a customer without firing them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if you meet someone new and you're not real sure, I always, some brokers teach, don't put anybody in your car unless they've signed the buyer brokerage. But do you know that person? I suggest and I teach that maybe you should show them 2 or 3 houses and see how they act in looking at those houses, what they do. I've shown houses to people who the minute they walked in the door, they would sit down at somebody's desk or start going through the drawers or going through somebody's closet or going in the refrigerator. You think they'd mind if I took a Diet Coke? It just makes my skin crawl.
Well, I always
And those
remember
people
your
are
saying in the training, I don't like crazy in my car.
Right. Yeah. Don't put crazy in your car. Or crazy's a customer. Crazy's not a client. Clients can put you at risk. Charges the real estate commission. If your client does something and someone's something, and that's you can be in trouble and you're liable. You're responsible for those people while they're in that house. So again, you may want to show a couple of houses to somebody before you decide if they're a customer or a client. Or you may want to start out, if you have to get them to sign something, make them a customer and then later promote them to a client. It's up to you, but that, again, that protects your commission, sure, but it can also cause you other troubles. So any other questions? No? Okay. Well, most of you know how to contact me. If you don't, go ahead, Susan.
So actually, I do have a question. I thought you meant over the stuff we were just talking about. This may be a little bit more like, Realtor 101, but I just would love to get some clarity because I'm not always so comfortable in this and around fair housing. What can you explain more clearly, like a quiet listing, a pocket listing, an off-market listing? Because I have like this fear of, going against fair housing and I don't want to get fined and I want to make sure I'm following the rules. But I see people posting all the time about, oh, I've got an off-market listing. I have a quiet listing. And I would just like to understand that better because it makes me feel like I really don't know that very well.
Yeah, I try not to do that. I know Sean hates that in this office. Sean is the team leader in the Decatur office. A lot of agents do that. Sometimes I'll say, well, I've got a listing coming, but I still won't accept any offers until it's actually in the MLS. I mean, that's my personal way of doing business. But there are a lot of agents that will do a pocket listing or a quiet listing and they'll talk it up at team meeting or they'll send out some emails and they'll put it out under contract outside of the MLS. And not pay the FMLS fee, which is the problem here. FMLS, if they find out, they are going after these agents. How are they going to find out? Who knows? You might have pissed off another agent in the office. They're going to tell FMLS you just sold your listing as a quiet listing or a pocket listing. But again, if you can sign that buyer brokerage agreement at any time with a future list date, and you can change that future list date. It's most of that is it's a personal thing. It's personal ethics. Is that how you want to do your business? And that's all I can tell you. You shouldn't do it. Will you get caught? Maybe. But personally, I don't do that, but I'm a rule follower.
Yeah, I am too. And I mean, I actually lost out on a Decatur listing, City of Decatur, 1.3 million, because the seller, there was an agent that had done a quiet listing a few doors down. And she didn't want to go with that realtor, but she was talking to me. And, I was pretty new at the time. And I said, I'm not going to do anything that's in violation of fair housing. And she didn't understand why I wouldn't just do something that's not listed and just a quiet listing and that only a
Well,
few
quiet
would hear
listings
about.
and pocket listings have nothing to do with fair housing. They have nothing to do with fair housing. That is just a rule that Sean has about quiet listings and pocket listings.
Mhm.
What was she looking to gain by having you do a quiet listing? Did she just did not want her house to show? She can sign an authorization to show and let you show
Mhm.
her house. She can sign a listing agreement with a future market date that would allow you to tell people that you have that listing coming, and you can sell her house before it hits the MLS, but the minute it goes under contract, you need to put it in the MLS and pay the FMLS fee. That's the way Sean likes to see it done in our office, but it's not fair housing. It has nothing to do with fair housing.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Mika, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question in regards to, it's around procuring cause, but it's more so the referral agent agreement. I had a situation this morning where we had signed the referral agreement, the broker to broker referral, and found out that the listing that sent over actually had the listing and buy side. The agent had both sides. So on the sheet where it says, if an in-house, no cooperating broker, the selling commission, hold on. The, the selling commission shall not be less than 50% of the total commission. So is that actually 50% of buy and sell side, or is it 50% of just the listing side? If I brought the client to the listing and I was the listing agent and I have to pay a referral fee, I owe that referral agent 50% of the total transaction, both sides?
No, just the buy side.
That's what I was thinking. So I helped somebody with a
They sent that person to you as a buyer.
They sent
just happened to
the person
choose
to me as a
purchase
listing.
your list. Oh, they sent the person to you as listing. Okay, I'm sorry. So they sent it to you as a listing, but as the listing agent, you've got 3%. As the buyer's agent, you got 3%. The referral side was 3%. Does that make sense?
So they get 50% of everything. So if I got
No.
okay. That's what I
No.
said to the agent also. This is someone from another brokerage. And I said I was going to ask to verify if how I interpret it was correct. And I interpret the same way you do.
Yeah. Did they send you a GAR referral form?
The GAR referral form was sent to Florida. And
Okay.
the Florida agent sold the listing, but to one of her clients. And when the payment came in, it was 50%. I think it's 50% of the listing side, not 50% of listing and buy side. But just based on what the referral agreement says, how do we interpret if an in-house sale, no cooperating broker, the selling commission shall not be, got it, less than 50%. So it says sell or list. Gotcha.
Right. The referral form is very specific.
It is very specific. Thank you.
Sure.
I got it. Thanks.
Okay. Amy, you have another question?
Yeah, just a quick clarification of the whole off-market, quiet, pocket. Do they all mean the same thing?
Pretty much.
Okay, so it
Pretty
just
much. It
means I'm putting it on FMLS and we're just trying to sell it like by getting the word out among agents.
Correct. Yeah. When you present something at, say, team meeting, and you say, I've got this coming soon listing, or this listing that's coming soon, it's not in the MLS yet. Some people would call that a pocket or a quiet listing. But you should, before you start even verbally advertising your listings, you should have a signed listing agreement with your seller. That is the proper way to do it.
Right. And I think I would always tell my sellers, you're going to do better if we put this on the FMLS and expose it to more people.
Well, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
unless there's some extenuating circumstances about showing the property and not being able to show the property.
Okay.
Yeah, they're always going to benefit from it going into the MLS. There's no question.
Okay.
And then Eileen, to piggyback
Yes,
what
ma'am.
Amy is talking about, once they show that listing to another agent, don't they have to open it up and show it to all?
Well, typically pocket listings are sold. You should have a signed listing agreement. Again, pocket listing, off-market listing, you've got to have some sort of listing agreement. How can you quote a purchase price for a property if you don't have a listing agreement signed by the seller agreeing to what price you're going to quote? That's what the authorization to show unlisted property is all about. Okay, so you should have something in writing that allows you to quote a price. If you allow some agents to come in prior to it being publicly in the MLS, that could be between you and your seller. If they just want to allow that one person to come in, a lot of agents do a caravan prior to it going live in the MLS. But again, you should also already have a signed listing agreement. I would say that would be more seller prerogative. And as long as you've got something, an email or something from them agreeing to allow an agent with their buyer in there early, that's entirely up to them. Again, they're shooting themselves in the foot by not going into the MLS and allowing the open market to potentially bring them multiple offers. So does that help?
It probably does, but it's my understanding that even with the coming soon, when you open that up to one, at this point, because of the listing agreement, you have to open it up to all. But I know it can be very, very confusing, and it's a lot of conversation behind it. But at the end of the day, I just practically, like you, Eileen, I just get my listing agreement signed. I might do an open house, but I just put it in.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's not your house. You were hired to market the house and help sell it. It is not your house. It is the seller's decision on how you move forward. And if the seller comes and says, or if you tell them there's an agent in your office got a buyer that's interested, we're going to wait until it goes on the market, and the seller says, oh, you can bring them in now. Make sure you've got something in writing that the seller agrees to that, because you don't want the seller to come back later and say, well, you made me agree to sell my house to this using this other agent and this buyer. It might have gone on the market. I might have gotten more. Again, pocket listings are a problem. So any other questions? Well, I hope I didn't bore you too much, but I do appreciate your attendance. And I've got another class I've got to teach. So all of you have a good day. Thanks.
Great information, Eileen. Thank you.
You're welcome.